On this day in 1996, Gary Geiger passed away, another ball player who got stuck with the tag, what could have been, if not for all of his injuries, and there were a lot. These are a few and the reasons why they happened, whether by accident, like breaking your hand making a play, or by circumstance colliding with your fellow outfielder. There's genetics, having all of your teeth extracted at the age of 22 because your teeth are too soft for fillings. Or there's that time your teammate didn't give you a heads up and watched you hit the wall and get knocked unconscious. Then there's the mental disabilities, the fear of flying and the anxiety that comes with just thinking about those flights. And finally, worst of all, self-inflicted injuries from alcohol, which you thought was your cure to fly, but really led to bleeding stomach ulcers. I could go on, but I'll tell you later about the time he was hit by a pitch and it collapsed his lung. Who put himself through all these hardships just so he could keep playing pro ball? Gary Merrill Geiger, outfielder, bats left, MLB debut, opening day 1958. The infamous trader Frank Lane was the first big league GM that saw Gary's abilities and would later say, if God had given Gary a sound body, he might have been one of the best players in the league. Gary Geiger played 12 seasons of Major League Baseball, hitting 77 home runs, but due to injuries, only 4 times did he play in more than 100 games in a season. Doesn't get much smaller than the township of Sandridge, Illinois, population 125 poor farmers who live about 80 miles from St. Louis. Gary's parents owned the only store in town, and the Geiger kids went to Gorham High School, located in a township not much bigger than their own, and to this day they still talk about how Gary would do things like hit a home run out of the park, over the school, and into the street. Gary easily could have played NCAA basketball on a scholarship, but the allure of all that instant money when you sign a baseball contract outweighs playing college hoops for free. So in 1954, 2 days after graduating high school, Cardinals scout Joe Monahan signed Gary Geiger as a pitcher for $4,000. A few days later, he was playing in games with their Class D team, and at 17 was their youngest player. 1955 would find Gary pitching in the Pony League, up north in Ontario with the Hamilton Cardinals. Pony stands for Philadelphia, Ontario, New York. That team finished in first place with Gary going 20-7, leading that league in complete games, strikeouts, and shutouts, and was then picked to the All-Star team. Gary jumped to AAA Rochester for 1956, but instead of pitching, was switched to center field for a few reasons. First of all, Cardinals had an abundance of pitchers, and Gary, he had control problems on the mound. Plus, they liked the fact that he was a good left-handed hitter, and he was really fast down the line, 3.5 seconds to first base. Gary said, I like the move. I want to play every day. 1957 saw Gary play with 2 of the Cardinals' AAA teams. But now, out of options, Cardinals general manager Frank Lane said Gary could be safely exposed to the draft. Yet, a few weeks later, Cleveland Indians hired Frank Lane as their new GM, and his first move was to draft Gary Geiger from the Cardinals. Making the Tribe's roster for 1958 would be no easy feat. Before the start of spring training camp, the Indians picked up Minnie Minoso to go with an already stacked outfield of Larry Doby, Roger Maris, Carroll Hardy, and Rocky Colavito. Yeah, good luck breaking into that lineup. Gary didn't, but did make the Indians squad as a backup outfielder. This was Gary Geiger's first big league spring training camp, the same camp my dad was at. And that's when he got Gary to sign this Orioles scorecard that is signed by 17 other players, including the names I just mentioned. Now, it's MLB opening day, 1958. Rookie Gary Geiger will make his first appearance in the big show as a pinch hitter for Herb Score. Gary said, I was scared to death. I was only 21 years old on opening day and had played just 1 year in the outfield. His first major league start came in the 3rd game of the season, playing center field in place of the injured Larry Doby. Gary stole a base and got his first big league hit, helping the Indians get their first win of the season. He hit his first home run in July, and in a game a week later, had 3 hits in an Indian victory. With the 58 season over, Frank Lane and Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey were talking trades. While this was going on, Gary was playing winter ball south of the border in Mexico and would hurt his neck when he crashed into the wall chasing down a fly ball. It's never good when you're laying in a foreign hospital with your neck really hurting, and the only word you understand as the doctor speaks in Spanish is the word broken. Long story short, Indians general manager Frank Lane is not happy with Gary for playing winter ball, so he accepts Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey's offer of Boston's fan favorite, Jimmy Pearsall, going to the Indians and Gary Geiger and Vic Wertz going to the Red Sox. Gary quickly became one of Tom Yawkey's favorites. The Red Sox owner would personally bring Gary a radio so he could listen to Red Sox games while in hospital, and Gary was in hospitals a lot. The 1959 Boston Red Sox spring training camp in Scottsdale was their first in Arizona. It was Gary's second. My dad was also at this camp. I don't know if it was before or after Gary Geiger collided with Don Budden chasing down a fly ball and was knocked unconscious. But Gary was back in time to be the opening day starter in left field for Boston in place of the injured Ted Williams. Gary said, "It was hard to believe that I was out there between two Hall of Famers. Jackie Jensen isn't, but I think he should be. He was an outstanding player and a great person. And Ted, he was the best hitter I had ever seen." Gary went on to say how much he always appreciated Ted Williams for telling him when he was getting too close to the wall. And the three players became good friends. It's a Don Budden autograph next to the Gary Geiger. Good combination, smashing into each other in the outfield. Since both Gary and Jackie had a fear of flying, they instead took long train rides to games. It was in Jackie's contract to do so, but not in Gary's. He had to pay his own train fare. Saturday, August 8th, 1959, NBC Game of the Week is on TV, and we're in Boston, and the Detroit Tigers are visiting Fenway Park. Gary Geiger is the man of the moment when he hits a 10th inning game-winning home run. With the game being televised, this meant his parents got to watch Leo DeRocher interview the player of their game, their son Gary, as he receives a brand new watch. It's 1960, and for the first time in years, the Red Sox would start a season without Jackie Jensen on the team. His fear of flying made him retire, basically giving his job to Gary Geiger, who would have a nice season, hitting .302 with 9 homers, stealing 16 bases, and as always, beating out most bunts. But on July 26, he was hit in the back by an early wind pitch. Gary had trouble breathing, but kept playing, and later in that game, hit a home run. Gary played the next day and would hit another home run. But later that night, he was rushed to the hospital with a collapsed lung, ending his 1960 season. Gary was Boston's 1961 opening day starter in center field and would have his best season with career highs across the board, and he was top 10 in the league for walks and stolen bases. A big Fenway Park moment for Gary was in August with the Twins' Camilo Pascual on the mound. Gary hit an inside-the-park grand slam, one of only 3 in Red Sox history. 1962 was just as good for Gary all the way around, but it didn't start out that way. On June 9th, the first batter of the game hits a long fly ball that Gary Geiger is chasing down, but unlike Ted Williams, Carl Yastrzemski didn't warn Gary as he got close to the wall. Gary hit the wall so hard that he was knocked out and had to be carried off the field on a stretcher. He would be back in time to make a few great plays, helping pitcher Earl Wilson seal his no-hitter. But Gary would be hospitalized twice in 1961 with stomach ulcers. Fast forward to July 4th, 1963, Gary Geiger recorded 15 putouts in a doubleheader against the Indians. This broke Al Simmons' major league record for putouts by an outfielder. Gary had 11 putouts in the first game and was a Red Sox record until 2009. Before the 1964 season even got started, Gary was hospitalized with bleeding ulcers and a stomach obstruction. In May, weighing only 130 pounds, he started 3 games but finishing only 1. Doctors told Gary if he started bleeding again, they'd have to remove part of his stomach. Pair that up with all his other injuries, and on top of that, his fear of flying. He retired that May, saying, "I get nervous 24 hours before we fly. I think about it during the games, and that's no good. The first couple of years I flew, it didn't bother me, but it gets worse every year." That night, he was supposed to fly with the team back to Boston to pack up all of his personal belongings. In In a fortunate twist for Gary, for the first time in years, the Red Sox scheduled flight was canceled because of bad weather, so the entire team took the train instead. This made an excited, upbeat Gary say, "I told you guys this was the best way to travel." Later, reporters found him on that train with tears in his eyes. Might have been tears of sadness, knowing it's all coming to an end, or maybe from years of frustrating injuries and that constant thought of what could have been. Either way, there were never words of bitterness. No one on that train ride believed Gary Geiger would ever play pro ball again, but he did. He attended Boston's 1965 spring training camp and actually made the team. But his season would be over after 24 games when he broke three bones in his hand. He was only 28 years old and would have been let go years earlier by most clubs. But Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey sticks with players he becomes attached to, even if they're always getting hurt. At season's end, Gary went down to AAA, exposing him to the Rule 5 draft, and he was claimed by the Atlanta Braves. He played 2 injury-plagued years for Atlanta, 66 and 67, with one game being memorable. That was May 12, 1966, the first game ever played at the new Busch Stadium in St. Louis. Gary Geiger would put himself in the record book and turned himself into a baseball trivia question when he got the first ever hit at the new Busch Stadium. And in his next at-bat in the 4th inning, Gary would be the first player ever to hit a double at the Cardinals' new park. Since he was born and raised less than 100 miles from St. Louis, Gary had many friends and family from the surrounding areas of his hometown at this game to watch their hero play Major League Baseball. Gary said he enjoyed his time in Atlanta, but after the 1967 season, the Braves sent him a contract with the maximum pay cut allowed, 25%. Gary sent it back, asking them to reconsider. The team put him off and stalled, never returning his calls. A couple of months later, just 2 weeks before spring training camp, the Braves put him on waivers. That's the business of baseball for you. Lucky for Gary, he got 2 offers, taking the one from the St. Louis Cardinals. Though he didn't make the squad, he became player coach for their Tulsa club in the PCL, working under Tulsa's manager Warren Spahn. At the end of the 1968 season, Gary was drafted by the Houston Astros and was with them for 2 seasons, not playing much and finishing the 1970 season with the Oklahoma City 89ers. And in 1971, he was player manager of the Cardinals farm team, the Tulsa Oilers. Gary was hoping to get a coaching offer from one of the major league teams. That offer never came. In 1972, he managed the Cedar Rapids Cardinals. In 1973, he was minor league instructor for the Detroit Tigers. In 1974, he was hired by the Braves to manage the Greenwood Braves. You can start to see a pattern forming here as his career in baseball is winding down. He's with a few clubs for a couple of seasons, then a few clubs for only 1 season. Then it gets to the point where nobody wants you. You're a drinker who drinks too much, so now you're completely out of baseball. You have kids and are in the middle of a divorce. You start your new career as a building superintendent for a school, which is just a fancy name for a janitor. You go from playing with the best players in baseball to cleaning up puke in a classroom full of little kids. You're 45 years old in the midst of a midlife crisis. So Gary makes the decision to go back home and live off his baseball pension. And that's what he does. Sits around and reads the sports page, plays golf, and does a little hunting. Helps out around his parents' house, and even got to see his son Gary Jr. pitch 2 seasons in the San Francisco Giants farm system. Gary's sister said, quote, "He was terrified to fly, and being a pro baseball player, that was part of his job. The only way he could get on a plane was to have a few drinks, and once he got in that routine, alcohol got a hold of him, and he just couldn't stop. In the end, alcohol killed him," unquote. Gary Geiger died from cirrhosis of the liver. He was 59. Not all endings to a story have the former player reminiscing about the good old days on the diamond or joke about how bad their golf game is. Gary got to do all that stuff, just not for very long. Some endings in life are brought about by what the person did to himself over time, whether it's overuse of prescription pills or hanging out with your 2 friends, Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, who are always around and never far from arm's reach. And all this stems from just being part of your job of having to get in a tin can with propellers many, many times over the season and then over the years. I wonder how many other ball players were turned into alcoholics because they relied on alcohol to solve their fear of flying. We'll wrap up today's long episode with two nice memories from a couple of Gary's kids. Like many, Gary Geiger never got over his fear of flying, so his one son, Nathan, drove the two of them over 1,200 miles up to Boston so his dad could play in the Red Sox Old Timers game. Must have been nice to watch your dad in his element, probably for the last time, hanging out with his old friends and doing what he loved to do, play baseball, even if it was for just that one afternoon. There's a lot of different types of drinkers. Here we have four different types. You got the slick, neat drinker, the sloppy drinker, the happy drinker, and the sad drinker. I think you can tell who's who. Getting back to Gary Geiger's nice memory, the next memory relates to the petty side of divorce. For years, Gary Geiger's ex-wife would not forward his mail to him. Then one time, his daughter was visiting his ex-wife, and she found over 500 letters that her mom never gave to her dad. These letters were from fans who sent their photos and baseball cards for Gary to sign. Gary's daughter delivered those letters to her dad, and Gary Geiger answered every one. Gary Geiger passed away on this day.